In 1984, Kenya was shaken by the discovery of a strange condition that made people thin. Some referred to it as slim. HIV was in Kenya. Many people, even those in leadership, were in denial. This denial wasn't just momentary. It lasted more than a decade. The pictures that were used to portray the condition in the media were ugly photographs of dying individuals. But even during the dark decade, dark for people living with the virus, the bravery of a few surfaced. In 1989, Joe Muriuki declared he was HIV positive. His family was ostracized as a result. The government sacked his wife, Jane, who was a teacher at the time.
The worst challenge was for my son, who is the firstborn, because he was in class 1 by then. And when the teachers came to know about him as the son of Muriuki, they segregated him. He had a separate table right at the corner, and he was staying alone.
It took 8 years for the government to put in place the first policy on HIV through the health sector issue of the sessional paper number 4 of 1997. 2 years later, then President Daniel Moi declared HIV a national disaster and formed the National AIDS Control Council a day later. In June 2001, Moi formed a task force to help chart the way forward in dealing with what was then a national disaster. The task force reported back a year later. Its findings formed the basis for the drafting of the first ever and so far the only legislation on HIV. The cabinet approved it in 2003, but it took another 3 years and several lapses of the bill for Parliament to debate and finally pass it. It did not take long before President Mwai Kibaki assented to the HIV and AIDS Prevention and Control Act of 2006. But from then on, there was a long and loud lull. It emerged that HIV fell in 3 separate ministries of the Grand Coalition government: public health, medical services, and special programs. There was no agreement, therefore, on which of the ministries would be responsible and bring the act to operation. During this period, there was also a lot of behind-the-scenes attempts at sabotage by various stakeholders. The most vicious were international organizations and aid agencies that support biomedical research in Kenya. Others were insurance industry players and some employers. The same forces had been responsible for the slow movement of house business in Parliament. And so in February 2009, when the Minister of Special Programs finally rose to the occasion and gazetted the commencement date for the Act, it was no surprise 5 sections were left out, much to the disappointment of the many people who'd taken part in the birth of a landmark piece of legislation that would safeguard human rights of the HIV positive.
In fact, they are the heart of the Act in terms of getting consent before you test for HIV. Getting, once you know a person's HIV status, then how do you keep it confidential, or in what circumstances then do you disclose to other third parties?
Section 14 deals with consent to HIV testing. The impediment was the language used in subsection 1b, which prohibits testing of a person except that if that person is a child, there's written consent from a parent or a legal guardian of that child. The phrase legal guardian also appears in section 18, which deals with results of HIV, and section 22, which deals with confidentiality and disclosure of information.
It was argued that this provision had not envisioned the fact that you do not have to go to court in order to become a guardian of some of the children you stay with. And so to that effect, then they proposed to make amendments, which they have already done.
In July 2009, a miscellaneous amendment act was published, in which the HIV and AIDS Prevention and Control Act of 2006 was amended. The term legal deleted from the 3 sections.
Did away with the technicality of having to prove that you have court orders showing that you're a legal guardian, but if you have custody of a child as probably the auntie, the uncle, then that would be contemplated to be guardian.
Well, that leaves 2 sections, 24 dealing with transmission of HIV and 39 with biomedical research, out of the crucial act. Mending the Ribbon examines these 2 sections in detail in the next 2 weeks. And so, Mwendia KTN Weekend Prime.